Ta-da. Well, this way it gets posted on my website.
Okay.
Oh, been one of those days. So are you working for anyone at the moment, or are you freelancing, or are you looking?
Doing some freelance work.
Okay, what, separations or designing or,
Both.
all right. Well, we'll see if we can't put that out there. Once we get a couple more people on, of course, we're a bit early, so that's okay. Last week
Yeah,
I had a bunch of people waiting for you. Dane was on and a bunch of others that you would have known, but who knows who's going to show up today? It's always one of those crapshoots.
I'm curious who else was on.
Happens. But
I mean, I'm curious who else was on. No.
you what?
I'm curious who else was on besides Dane.
I have it recorded, so you can go on the website and you can kind of see it, but Dane was there and he was definitely waiting. Since you weren't able to get on, he ended up answering some questions, but I had several other people that probably don't know you, but were on just to pick up some information and kind of get a feel for what was going on around you.
Mhm.
But we'll see what happens. We still have a little bit of time before anyone shows, I guess. Who knows?
I think it's 6 minutes.
Yeah, something like that. Although it doesn't mean that they necessarily jump in right on time.
True. Yeah. I checked out your website. That's really nice. I put together one myself recently.
Oh,
So
good.
it's got a portfolio with a bunch of designs and the brands I've worked with and things like that.
So what's your website under? Just Shawn Lewis or what?
It's let's see. S. Lewis Graphics, like my email, .portfolio.com.
Okay.
SLEWISGRAPHIX. .portfolio.com. Let me see. It's in this web browser here. Myportfolio.com. But anybody can, I've got a QR code I can put up. So if anybody needs any, let me go ahead and do that real quick.
That would probably be
Divvy
good.
that away.
Okay.
Or I can put it on at the end. Let me see.
Definitely put it on. Shoot me a line. I'll kind of do it in a email follow-up
Okay.
because I do have a couple of prospective clients that are always that don't keep full-time artists on staff, and so they're always looking for someone that could possibly do some separations or some designing for them.
Yeah, I find with my experience now that most of the time I hit things without any changes on press, which is key to making people happy, especially the printers. Who wants to tear out a screen or change an ink color?
Well,
Anything like that.
not having to mess around on press is always a good thing.
Yep, press time's expensive.
The key to success, unfortunately, there are way too many people that come out of school that have quote unquote learned Photoshop or Illustrator or both of those. And they're now doing the designing and separating for screen printing, but they don't know anything about screen printing. And so they come up from all the wrong directions, which is something we should really talk about once we get going.
Yes, something can look really good on screen, but it doesn't mean it's going to print correctly.
Well, and it's no matter how many companies I go into, it's rare to have an artist that understands anything about screen print per se in terms of color order and ink deposit and type of ink, where some of the issues would come in, where they wouldn't. They basically just design based on what they see, which if you're doing offset separations, not a big deal. Screen print, not on the same level.
Yeah, you got a lot of dot gain, especially when your total coverage is up there higher. There's all kinds of issues there. Hey, let me try sharing the screen once. And
Okay.
How do I do that? This is I think like my second Zoom meeting. So Should be a button here somewhere, I think.
Got me. My computer
Oh, here it
skills.
is. It's bright green, right? In this.
Hey, I've learned how to
It
do
says the
certain
host
things.
disabled participant screen sharing. So you've got to be able to allow me to share my screen in order for me to do it.
So what
Or
do I
either
need?
that, or I can email you this QR code, and then you can share it. That's-
You're assuming I know how to do that. Huh?
All right.
That's a wild assumption. I'm going to tell you that now. You know what? There's a chat thing. Why don't you just post your whole thing on there, and this way anybody that wants to will be able to pick it up.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. See if I can put that QR code in there in the chat as a graphic. Let me see.
We got Motivated New York, and we have Mac coming on. I'm not sure who's who, but
Let's see. Where did that QR go?
so we do have a question from Motivated to New York.
Zero spread.
There are
Do
a
they
bunch
mean
of
zero
people
dot
in the,
gain?
okay. So let me see. Tim O'Neill's gone. So this can be a question for later, but when getting into multicolored discharges, there's zero spread. There's always going to be some spread if you're dealing with halftones, especially on fabric. And so, can you really compensate easily for that? It's always a tough question because it depends on the mesh count you're going through and the type of fabric you're going on. If you're doing 4-color process, I've seen some amazing work done with discharging, but you're going to find that it definitely takes a little bit of playing and a little bit of adjusting. Hey, Tim, how are you?
I'm doing good, Charlie. How you doing?
Good. I tried to contact one of the guys that I know at M&R, and I'm waiting for a response about your RIP and whether they can just kind of walk you through what you need to check out. Because to be honest with you, I know nothing at all about that.
Okay. Well, it's good to know our limitations.
So I did shoot off a text message. I'm hoping Marco is the guy who that definitely does know quite a bit about it, since he's the one who's always demonstrating it at the shows.
Okay.
And I know way too many printers who are using an eye image and doing some really nice halftone work. What halftone count are you doing mostly?
Oh, you're asking the wrong guy, Charlie.
Yeah, okay.
I'm 30,000 feet here.
I understand. Never mind. There are some things that I don't touch either.
Yeah. I'm hoping my artist Adrian is going to join this little webinar. So.
All right. Well, Shawn Lewis is, let's see, Shawn and I go back to about 1993 when he worked for Nutmeg, and I was hired to work with the art department to teach them how to design and separate for black shirts. Back at that time, the black shirts coming out of there left lots to be desired. We'll let it go at that.
That was back when everybody was doing it still in the darkroom with contact frames and ruby lith and hand stippling and doing things like that.
It was interesting. You guys had all the computers. I know beans about them. But I think, and I still have the very first shirt that you guys did, which was a Charlotte Hornets shirt. And we had, everybody had to design on illustration board and then convert that into the separations. And we had to do several of those by hand before we got over to the Mac, which I think is still the right way to learn it, because it gives you an opportunity to really think it through and actually have to work it, as opposed to just jumping on a computer and pushing things around, not understanding enough. But I don't know if you ever heard the story about how I got that position, how I got to be hired. I was doing a consulting job in London for a company that wanted to learn how to do black shirts. And so I was working with them. There was a guy by the name of Simon Bamber, and his partner was Paul. In any event, they ended up getting bought out by Nutmeg. So they became Nutmeg UK. And so when they came to the States, they met with Bennett Altman, if you remember him, who was the COO. And he said, you know, at that time you were competing against, I forgot the name of the other company that was doing really great black shirts. But looking at stuff that was coming out of Nutmeg, it was mostly vector and not really very inventive. And so Bennett wanted to hire somebody to work with the art department. And so Simon, there was another consultant mentioned, and Simon said, no, you got to hire Charlie. And so I flew down there and met with Bennett. And, I was supposed to come down and work with you guys for 3 sessions. Almost 3 years later, I was finally done. Working with the art department was the easy part. Working with the screen and production departments where all the difficulties came in. But I remember at my meeting with, who was the head of production at that time? Heavyset guy. Basically, I said, look, let's eliminate all the colors. Let's just deal with 3 things: black shirts, ash, and white shirts. I said, number one, you'll never run out of those because you can have those in stock forever as opposed to colors. And I don't think you're going to have any back orders or anything. And I remember him saying, you know what, ain't going to happen, but we'll give it a try. About a year later, he said, you know, at that meeting, I thought you were so full of shit that I couldn't even stand sitting at that table. But as it turned out, it actually worked out. So for about a year and a half, they were on solid black or ash. And then, of course, the sales department decided that they needed to get back to colors. And so that was a interesting journey back then. But Louis Fish ended up taking over and is still running one of the shops down there. I don't know.
I think Dick Hanover was fairly high up in the production side of things as well.
I did a lot with Dick. He was the one who he would call me when it was a hot market situation to find out who the printers in a particular state were that could handle the hot market. And unfortunately, he had a little too much to drink, pulled into his garage and didn't shut the engine of his car. And they found him dead as a doornail behind the wheel.
I heard when that happened. It wasn't too many years ago.
Oh, it's quite a long time back.
Was it? Huh. Maybe I just heard later.
Yeah, kind of strange. He died of asphyxiation from carbon monoxide, and one of my neighbors, same week, had the same situation, but not in a garage. He was up in the mountains and had a heater that tipped over, and his dog knocked the alarm out of the wall. And so, and the unfortunate thing with that is you don't smell it. It just kind of gets you. In any event, moving over to other things, let's see what we have here. So Motivated New York. So you want to get into discharge, which I love. Matter of fact, I'm in the midst of trying to finish up my a book, a technical book I decided to write due to the pandemic. I never considered myself really much of a writer, but I do have a whole thing in there on water base and on discharge. I think it's a great way to go. I think it's got a lot of positive situations. The greatest difficulty is taking a plastisol printer and then moving to water base. it's not as difficult as it used to be. There's a lot of options out there. Understanding a bit about it is really the whole thing. Biggest and most critical part is getting your screens made correctly. And if you can make your screens correctly, half the battle is won. The screens that I've been using in my workshop are done with a new emulsion that Chromaline came out called Hydro X. So it's a water resistant emulsion, but it's also tuned to LED systems. So I was using a Vastex exposing unit for my workshop, which you were in, and my 305s, which was for a 4-color process job, were coated just on the outside, one coat, and exposures were 4 seconds. And I was holding dots that were definitely below a 5% dot. So there's definitely opportunities there. And I got to shut off my email because it's driving me crazy here. There we go.
Were you doing 55 or 65 line or?
It's all 65 line.
Okay.
And, you know, there was a lot of discussion always about EOM, emulsion over mesh.
Sure.
Michelle Kaza is one of the people that I think is probably the guru in screen printing. When I was at his factory many years ago, they just coated the outside of the screen, but and he was doing big graphic screens. They used a big squeegee, a printing squeegee. They'd pour out some emulsion, they'd swipe over it, and they were done. And the reality is the whole EOM thing, I understand it, and et cetera, about getting proper deposits and so on. Properly shooting the screen is part of it. And in order to hold the detail, I found that going to a single coat with a proper exposure and a post exposure, I didn't have any breakdown at all, not a pinhole to be seen.
Yeah, the
So,
post exposure is really important as far as with water based, to make sure that the screens don't break down,
but you know, with this particular emulsion, so whatever your exposure time is, they want you to post expose for 3 to 4 times the length.
Yep.
On a 4-second exposure, it was a 16-second post exposure, which was no big deal.
Yeah. Was that through a CTS?
No, I used film actually.
Okay.
So these were films that were done many, many years ago by Serochrome Seps. They're made up of a series of dot angles. It's 4 angles, 3 angles, 2 angles, and everything at 1 angle to show that it's not necessary to have more than 1 angle.
Right.
And
yeah, it's a serpentine dot pattern. Yeah.
you know, I haven't had morays or anything like that for the most part. I mean, every once in a while you'll pop into a moray, but it's been a rarity as opposed to working with 4 angles where you traditionally had a moray either in the magenta or the cyan. And so by going to 1 angle, I've been using a 61-degree angle probably for 30 years now. I just don't hit morays. And so, you know, if somebody's using AccuRip is set to 22.5 degrees, will that do what it's supposed to? Yes, more often than not. I just found that a 61-degree angle gives me more of what I want all the time.
It depends a lot on the grid that the postscript is converting to as well. If it will drop to an angle that fits within the grid a lot of times too. So it,
Yeah, I
it
mean,
depends on the RIP side of the software too.
So, you know, there's a particular formula that I work with. So if you take your mesh count and you take your dot count, if the halftone divides evenly into the mesh, you're going to have a moray problem, no matter what you do. So if you can go to an odd amount, so let's say with a 305 mesh, if I take a 65 line halftone, it divides in like 4.5 times, which is great. Anything that's an odd number is really good. Back when UV printers started going with UV ink, they had to go to a finer mesh count. They went up to 390. Doing a 65 line halftone on 390 mesh, and there were morays all over the place because 65 divides into 390 6 times evenly. And anytime you have an even situation, it's going to moray like crazy. So the more odd the number, or the more in between whole numbers that you can get to, the better off. So in deciding on a halftone count, work with the mesh that you're going to use with, see how it divides in. And if you have to, either change your halftone count or change your mesh count so that you have that odd number.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. And then also, if your numbers come out irrational rather than rational, that seems to help for some reason as well. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, listen, anything that's an even progression is going to have a problem.
Mhm. Yeah. A lot of science and math involved in that art.
Huh?
There's a lot of science and math involved in that art.
Yeah, there's a great article that Michelle Kaza wrote a long time ago called Fine Line Halftone Reproduction, and it's published through SGIA. And it's quite complex. It's about 35 pages long, and it goes into all kinds of detail on that, which I did read years ago. I can't remember it at this point, but you know, for someone really wanting to study this whole thing, there's quite a bit written about it. Most of what Kaza's written, and I've got several of his books, definitely addresses the issue, but he was a graphic printer or a fine art printer. Not that he didn't do a t-shirt just for the fun of it. And his formulas were quite different than what we would normally go with. I mean, he was doing 300 line halftone work, where most of us don't know how to shoot a 300 line halftone. Not only shoot it, don't even know how to produce a 300 line halftone. Unless you have a image setter, you're not going to get there. And so a lot of what he did had nothing to do with what we do as t-shirts. Although I do have several companies, especially one in Russia, that does a huge amount of 150 line halftone using discharge, and it gets amazing results out of it. So, you know, technical abilities are part of it, understanding the process and being willing to do a fair amount of testing is also part of it, to see what your capabilities are based on your film output or direct to screen. And even on that, problem with direct to screen, I don't think anything can go above an 85 line. Not that I think there's a real need to go above an 85 line. And as far as film, you know, I don't think you can get much better than a 75 line halftone, if that, off of film. And if you take a close look at film with a loop, it's always scattered. And similarly, on the direct to screen systems, if you're using ink, it's going to splash a bit. If you're using wax, it's a little firmer. I was looking at the SATI laser system about a week ago, and that one is pretty awesome. They were doing 85.
I haven't used one of those, but it seems like it would be very promising. You know, I haven't used one.
So the shop I went to that had it for 3 months and had problems with it. And it turns out that the rip was not tuned into the proper dot spread. And so what they did was they had to print out a series of dots, and they had to take a densitometer to get a reading to see if their 5% dot was really 5%, even though it was theoretically 5%. And by making certain adjustments, they were really able to fine tune it. They're now thrilled with their unit. But it took about 3 months in getting one of the heavyweights from SATI to come in and actually work with them. But the machine is extremely fast, no consumable. What was interesting is you can shoot half a screen with one image and then shoot the other half with a different image, and they don't interfere with each other. Where on all the others, they're scanning the whole screen. And so you can't really do that very easily. But I think it was 1 minute and 29 seconds to do a screen if you did one screen at a time. If you had two on, it was like 2.5 minutes to get two screens done, which pretty fast.
Yeah, you're limited to the, as far as resolution to your wavelength of light, depending on what color light you're using in that laser.
True. They're pretty fast. Biggest thing that they forgot to tell them was you have to take Q-tips and clean off the lasers.
Mm.
So you turn it to a very low wattage. You have a piece of paper that it projects to, and you'll be able to see dust and just wipe it off. But I think it has 128 lasers on there, so there's quite a bit involved. But the unit itself was pretty amazing. And
The image setters use a laser with a spinning mirror setup. I wonder if anybody's got that for the laser direct to screen.
well, I think that the SATI one does do something like that.
Okay.
It's a laser that's just hitting specific areas of the screen. I know from what I remember, they do have a mirror system in there, but I don't know enough about lasers to really elaborate on any of that.
Mhm. Yeah,
So when you were in Thailand, were they using film? Were they using direct to screen?
we were just doing separations there. We didn't have a actually screen print production facility. I was training the separators, which
Okay.
means I had to explain how ink works when it's printed through a screen onto a t-shirt. And ink, coverage, there's a whole lot of variables that have to be taken into account for when you're doing that type of tutoring.
So were you teaching everything on Photoshop, Illustrator? Were you using any of the software situations like Separation Studio?
We were doing everything in Photoshop, and it was
Okay.
done with selections, either made from the layers when the art was created, or make our own selections. And then as far as Illustrator separations, we did some of those, but they were all vector flat art, 100% or nothing. Where the Photoshop separations, we did some for Fanatics. At the time, it was called their Midnight Madness program.
Okay.
And it was really nice illustrations that were all done in Photoshop. And they weren't too complicated, usually 2 or 3 colors plus a couple whites on a black shirt. And so they were fairly simple as far as selections. But, a lot of times before I arrived there, they were doing things like, instead of using curves in Photoshop to control your ink distribution, they were using, threshold and what are the other ones? I don't know. But in any case, curves does pretty much anything you want it to. You can invert, you can threshold, you can do a lot of things that, let me see if I've got.
Yeah, that was one of my
Just, levels they were using, and once I taught them curves, which has got a little bit of a learning curve to it, no pun intended. It really opened up their eyes, because you could, say, okay, well, I want a little bit of this color in the highlights, and I want a lot of it in the dark areas, and I want none of it in the mid-tone areas. So, you have that control where you can put the color where you want to. So it was, it's there almost 6 months, and a lot of their separations really got pretty good, for a simulated process. It's especially not seeing the results at the end of the dryer,
well, I think that's the one thing that I'm a big advocate of is if you're going to train an artist, one of the things you want them to do is be on press, watching the progression of colors go down to see how they could possibly make adjustments in terms of the way in which they're separating from color
Yeah.
order to ink deposit, et cetera.
Where you're going to put your flashes and cool downs and
Yeah, I mean, yeah, back when I had my shop, we didn't have to worry about flashes because it hadn't been invented yet. So that was pretty good as far as I was concerned. But I made all of my artists get on the floor and actually print a job, at least one, if not two. They all spent at least a week printing and predominantly printing the jobs that they had designed and separated so that they can get a better understanding of how they could do this to be more production friendly. And I think that's really the biggest issue that artists have is they may know how to separate a job, but is it a production friendly situation? Did they build in too many flashes, for example, or maybe even not enough, understanding something about some of the inks, such as some of the fluorescent, not some, all fluorescent inks are horribly sticky. And so if you have a fluorescent that goes down and you have another color going down on top of it without flashing in between, you're going to pull up most of that fluorescent color and it's going to start clogging the next screen. So setting it up so that your fluorescents are either at the end or right in front of a flash eliminates the problem. The problem
another
that
thing is the transparency of ink, since we're on the subject of ink issues, like reflex blue, for instance, it's one of the, it'll turn into a sky blue. It'll turn into a Pantone 299 if you're not careful with the way you're printing it.
And I think that's one of the things artists, what they see on their monitor is what they think that they're going to get when it actually prints. And the number one issue is they're always designing on a white background. Well, the number of shirts that we print that have a white background is minimal. I mean, it does happen, but for the most part, we're on colors. And as we get to dark colors, it's quite different than even being on a light colored shirt. Although you could put in a false background and make it look, oh yeah, it's going to be on a green shirt. I'll put a green around the image. Yeah, but it's not behind the image. It's only around the image. And so it doesn't have any impact on what could happen on press. One of the things that I really like, and I've been using Separation Studio in its various formats over the years from spot process up until now, is I can actually put it on a colored garment and see how that color is going to impact my design. And do I have to do anything to my underlay to strengthen it so that it blocks out more of that color if I'm going to go on a variety of shirts? Okay, so I was just reading, if you're using a 21-step grayscale, should you be focused on hitting number 7? You still should. That's supposed to give you the optimal exposure. And switching over to Hydro X and going to water-based, I think is a smart thing. But at the same time, make sure you post-expose 4 times the length, 3 to 4 times the length of your exposure time. I'm still a bigger fan. I mean, I know that 21-step grayscales is certainly one of the things that a lot of people are using. I still like using a step wedge that has a series of halftones in it so that I can see the halftones that I'm actually holding or not holding. And the thing with the 21-step grayscale, that 7 is always a little questionable. I've been doing some testing with it. I think it's very good, but I still like a step wedge. I don't know if anybody else has any questions, but if you do, throw them out there or unmute and say something. I mean, right now there are 3 of us there are 2 of us that aren't muted. Me and Shawn is muted now also. I guess I'm the only one who's talking right now.
I had some noise going on in the background, so I muted for a minute. I'll be back shortly. I'm just
Oh, no problem.
Okay, I'll be back. But yeah, I agree. Step wedge is the way to go.
So if you haven't made a step wedge, now I say, and who has a good step wedge? I do. email me and I'll send you a copy of it.
Hi, Charlie. I got a question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
So I'm working on this piece of artwork, and like you were just saying right now, the actual artwork was built on a white background. And of course, they want to go on a black shirt.
Of course they do.
Yeah. So I'm going through Separation Studio, right? I think I got the colors down to 6 colors, but in this artwork, I have it actually printed out right here. They got like a lot of transparencies making other colors at the exact same time.
Yeah.
So trying to create the exact same colors in Separation Studio while trying to keep all the other colors intact. It's kind of been tricky.
I don't doubt it. I'm going to let Shawn take over on that because this is more of his alley. To me, I think Separation Studio is great. There's some things that are extremely difficult no matter which way you go. When you have tone over tone over tone over tone to create
Yeah.
secondary, tertiary colors, it's brutal. And, you know, I think the thing that I used to do, and it's probably cheating, but and Shawn will jump in, is when you do your strike off and you show it to your client, don't show them the original, just show them the print and ask them what they think about the print. When you start holding things side by side, you're never going to quite get to where you want to be.
Yeah.
Okay?
Especially with transparencies, because like the background plays so much off the white background, and then without it, you know, Separation Studio takes the white completely out, and I'm
Right.
like, wow, it's really much duller, but like it's what it would look like if it was on a black background.
Which version are you of Separation Studio are you on?
We are on
Sep Studio 4 or are you on
3.
NXT? 3.
Yeah.
So download NXT and watch the video on it first because there's quite a bit that it's doing. I'm just first playing with it. It's quite different. I was on 4 and that I can maneuver through pretty easily. NXT definitely has a lot more things going on. But I would tell you to download it and test it out. Shawn, you want to jump in on that? Richard, how are you?
It's good thing you're not doing it on dark sand lights.
Yeah, that's what they wanted. They wanted like, can I get both? And I'm like, those are 2 different problems.
You may need to share some screens and then throw some extras in that compensate for the difference.
Oh yes, definitely.
And what line screen are you using for this? Because you know, mixing colors like that, if your saturation is low, you know, meaning low percentage wise, you know, 30% of one color and 20% of another, you're going to end up with a little bit of the print's not going to look very smooth. You're going to see a lot of the halftone interfere with the shirt pattern. So you got to make sure your separation has enough saturation in those lighter color versions. I think if you could hold that up again one more time so I can look at it. Let me see.
Yeah. Move
Yeah,
it
like
over
in
a little.
the up in the lighter versions, the ones that are like at northwest, northeast, west, you know, those areas are going to end up having a lot of shirt show through.
Yeah.
And less saturation.
And
And
we
so
actually have a shirt here, and this is actually how it started coming out.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah.
a card.
Looks like you could use a little more contrast in your, you know, in the area where the is, and the area in the top of the B. There could be a little more contrast between those two, and that's just a matter of taking some of the darker color that's used to make those and taking it out, unless those are solid colors. And then
Yeah, they're more solid colors on the white. And really every time I adjusted it, it was really just the edges, the brighter colors that got affected than the darker middle color.
okay.
Then every time I try to adjust the
Yeah.
underbase, it's mostly more on the sides than in the middle. So I was trying to figure out a way to just adjust the middle with keeping the sides kind of the same. So I was kind of making like 2 different underbases, one for the middle to kind of compensate. I wasn't really sure. It was more or less experimenting.
Mhm. And then you could combine them, the two. of
Yeah,
them.
and then combine it once I found something that I had.
Yeah, sure. One thing that I find is really nice to have when you're working on the artwork like that, and you talked about, changing the saturation or the percentage value, is to have good selections for each of the different areas. And in order to do that, you can, if you do it as a smart object in Photoshop, and then, well, that's getting too complicated, but in any case, each area would be good to have its own selection. So that way you can select that channel and then go to your separations and adjust each individual separation by itself, without having to affect the other areas. Does that make sense, or does it seem like are you following what I'm saying? Is
Kind of
is
like,
have the power to select certain areas and adjust just those areas, only those areas.
okay, so more or less, I'd want to adjust all that first in Photoshop before taking it back into Separation Studio.
No, actually, after you get the output out of Separation Studio and you do a strike off and a print, bring that separation in, bring it into Photoshop and then make it a working file. You can go ahead and put a black layer and a black shirt background on it. I think Separation Studio does put a black shirt in there. And then you can adjust your channels, set them as a spot color and set them to whatever dot gain you think works well for your shop. And the opacity, is basically what controls a lot of that.
Yeah. One of our biggest issues is that the transparency on some of these colors are super light. So trying to get them to hold on our screens has been the issues. And we're doing a direct to screen. We have an iMage, and that's definitely been a problem, especially with our greens on this artwork in particular.
Are you able to hold 5% on up?
No, I think the lowest that we can go, I think 15% on there.
Yeah, that's tough to work around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
you probably want to do some exposure tests and do step wedge and so forth to see if you can get that down to closer to 5%, or even ideally 3% would be nice.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand that when you get that small dots as well, you're going to end up having chances of moire issues with the mesh interfering with the smaller dots, because that little dot's easily blocked by a screen, where a bigger dot, it's made up of several cells of that mesh. So
Mhm.
you're going to end up with watching that as well.
So I have a question. Which emulsion are you using on your screens?
I'm not sure. That's usually the more screen print department. I'm in the art, but I dabbled in both.
Well, no, the reason I ask, if you were to switch to a faster emulsion,
Oh, you know what? I have it right here. Orange Ilano?
okay. So Richard, you work for Ulano. Orange is very nice. What's the detail situation like with the orange?
Well, orange is a pure photopolymer, so it's nice and fast. It's designed for low output LED units. So if you want to do halftone work, I want you to learn how to use a dual cure, a diazo-based dual cure, where you add diazo to an SPQ photopolymer. This will give you better resolution. And yes, it will take longer to cross-link. But it's very difficult to get the very small dots or to do the finest work with a pure photopolymer. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, so
You're trying to deliver mail, you don't do it in a Ferrari. You go slowly, make sure everything is accurate. Otherwise, you go too fast, you make too much mess.
one of the things that I don't know if you've had, Richard, have you had a chance to play with the Chromoline Hydro X at all?
No, I've heard about it, and Kevin
It's
Tooth, when I saw him in LA, he clamored for it, but it's supposed to be a breakthrough, but I haven't
So
touched it yet.
I've been playing with it. I haven't played with it on a iMage, and that's probably the one I would tell you to try. but you're definitely going to have to change your rip in terms of what it can hold. But it's extremely fast and it holds great detail because it was really designed for an LED system. And so that's when I would have you test out.
And what was that called? One more time?
It's called Hydro X, HYDRO X. It's made by Chromaline. And it's a water resistant. And what I would try, what length runs are you doing? You're doing 50 pieces, you're doing 500 piece runs in general?
About 300 pieces.
Okay.
Usually.
So, I would try it using a sharp edge scoop coater, maybe a single coat on each side. And see
Yeah,
if you
I believe
can
that's what we're doing.
have them test it out to see if you can nail the exposure. If you're doing a calibration bar, a series of those, take it from a 3% dot and up. So go 3, 5, 8, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, etc. And have them image it, wash out, and stick it on press and just bang the hell out of it for a while. Just stand there and just keep on pounding away and see if you're holding up well.
Okay, yeah. That's probably one
That,
of our,
to me, that's the difficulty on direct-to-screen systems, is knowing if your exposure was correct or not.
yeah, that's one issue. We had a guy come in and come and look at our settings, and he was just like, it's been defaulting to the wrong one. And I was like, I knew something was wrong because our clean lines, when we used to run on film, were super crisp. I mean, it was
Yep.
ridiculous. But now it's like, it looks like it was like in Photoshop, like it looks pixelated. I'm like, something's wrong, you know?
Oh, Tim,
We're
who
having
was
a-
on, earlier, is having this problem with his eye image, holding halftones.
Yeah.
And to me, I just think it's a whole series. The settings are just not correct.
Yeah.
And I don't know enough about it, but you're in there. You know how to set these up? Or you agree, Richard, you agree, or was that,
Well, one of the things I want you to understand is that the eye images using a transparent, or what they're calling an opaque ink, but it's a water-based ink.
Yeah.
No
Right.
matter what, the ink itself will be a droplet like what's on the windshield of your car, that it has surface tension and it builds a dome. At the outer edges of the dome, there's not as much ink. It's not a perfect flat hockey puck. It's a domed black ink. And so the outer edges, the longer you're exposed, light gets through a little bit. So what you need to do is you need to do experiment. I saw you turn around, Mr. Rodriguez. You turned around to look. I assume you've got a halftone behind you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
so what you want to do is that you want to print those and see exactly what dot size that you're getting. Have you linearized that image?
We have not yet. We just
Okay,
got some
now
new.
so you can't talk about how fine a dot you've got, or whether you can ask answer Sean's question. Can you print a 5% dot? Can you make a 5% dot?
right? And
Now,
is it really a
you have-
5% dot?
You have the tool here in a phone.
Mhm.
That you put it on a 2-inch roll of tape or a 3-inch roll of tape. iPhones don't really focus that well underneath 3 inches, but you can take a very good picture, or you invest in a $35 microscope, a USB digital microscope, and you measure with that. But you can also, once you've taken a photograph of it, you can then blow it up in Photoshop, make it as easy to read as possible. It's hard to read on a little 3-inch screen like this, but you can get it into Photoshop. You can take a picture and see whether or not the dot and the hole that you're using. Now, because you're not using positives anymore, it's very difficult to figure out how big lines actually are. So you can't actually measure, but you'll see that if you print a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 10% halftone dot, and then try and image them, and then even more important, print them. Just take black ink and print them, no matter what color you're supposed to be printing, on a piece of fabric, but also on a piece of photocopy paper. on photocopy paper, you're gonna see that's the best that you can reproduce. And you compare. Now, granted, you could print, tape a piece of inkjet film,
Mhm.
emulsion side up, meaning that the coating that's on the polyester film would be up, and print with your eye image. Just tape it to a blank screen and tape that halftone positive. So you've got something to compare it to.
Okay.
The other thing is that what I've used for a long time is pieces of wire that you can measure with a micrometer. You know, anybody in the automobile world that has a micrometer, pieces of wire are perfect things that you can compare, that it's exactly 0.75 thousandths of an inch or something like that. And it's a known thing that you can transfer and see exactly how big dots are. But you're going to find that you need to correct. You told Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, you wanted a 10% dot, but then it was made into a screen, and then ink came through, and you have to determine whether or not you're hitting what you're aiming at. You've got to be able to measure that.
Okay.
And that's linearization. Call me or write me. I'll give you several articles you could read. The great Mr. Kaza wrote the big one. Mark Coudray wrote a smaller one. I know that Charlie's got the linearization article he printed in Impressions magazine 30 years ago.
Well, Kaz's article, Fine Line Half Tone Reproduction, is the article you're talking about.
Yeah, C10.
Yeah.
The
And-
big 35-page article.
Yep.
Or
I mentioned it earlier.
Okay, the 4-page article is smaller to read, but what it means is ready, fire, measure. Oh, I missed. So you correct. And then you can tell Shawn, yes, I can print 6% dots, because you can't print a 3% dot.
Yeah.
What city are you located in?
If the best you're holding now is a 15% dot, you're definitely in trouble.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Richard, were you talking to me about what
Well,
city?
No, I was talking to Mr. Rodriguez.
Oh, in
Oh,
Merced,
okay.
California.
Okay, so you've got LA people there that can help you with that sort of thing. That the M&R distributors are quite good there.
Yeah, you're on your CTS, the M&R, the actual and intended curves in the RIP software are extremely important to get right, to make your linearization good, because you need to maybe put down 15% ink to get a 10% dot, or maybe the other way around, depending on your whole setup. So
It seems that a lot of it has to do with who set up your machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, I was just out at a shop in New Jersey that has the new satting machine, the laser. And for 3 months, they were going crazy with it. And they finally got the big guy in who went through the whole linearization with them, et cetera. And they're now getting exactly what they were hoping for. But it definitely took a fair amount of time. And the guy who did set it up initially just didn't do the job that he was supposed to do. And it's not an unusual thing. You know, somebody sets it up and said, oh, look, there's some dots. Okay, I'm out the door.
Yeah, pretty much. That's kind of like where our issue. The guy who was in charge of that is no longer with us. He retired. So it's kind of fallen in my lap, mine and the head production guy. So we're both trying to figure out this, program both together and trial and error until, we start to get everything crystal clear. So, a little.
I think that's the whole thing. I think with more and more direct-to-screen systems hitting the market and more people doing halftone work on them, getting the RIP adjusted appropriately is definitely a big part of it. And I guess learning how to do the linearization is one of the things you're going to have to go through. The toughest thing is having something to measure against.
Yeah.
Generally, you're going to use a densitometer, but most print shops don't have densitometers. But Richard has an answer. What's that, your densitometer? You're on mute.
I was eating chips, so I turned myself on mute. Yes, everybody is not going to go out and spend the cash money to buy a densitometer.
They are nice though.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're serious, and, you know, Charlie and I were serious in the 80s, we're the grand old men here, so
In the 70s, I had my
there
densitometers.
you go. In the hallway, I have a UV transmission densitometer, and that's for measuring positives. There you can take the output that you get from you know, any inkjet printer, and you measure the different mediums, and that's what the eye image is, another inkjet printer.
Yeah.
Just happens to print direct, that's all.
There was a company at the show at SGIA a number of years ago that was selling kind of a densitometer for like $99 there. And I did buy one. Asked me if I ever opened up the box. I need to dig through and see what I have. If you shoot me an email, when I find it, I will send you the information on it. But that might, I think it's kind of a densitometer. It's been so many years that I don't know exactly why I bought it, because I'm one of those guys, if it sounds like it's interesting and it isn't ridiculously expensive, I'll take a shot and buy it. But I do have to go through my stuff, and I know I have it. I know I've never opened it and read it, so I need to do that.
Be fun to mess with.
Well, you know, some things you buy in the hopes that you're going to get around to playing with them, and things get in the way. And then eventually one day you realize, I know I have the damn thing somewhere, but I don't know where it is, and I don't remember what it is. I know it was $99. That was all.
It was worth the experiment.
But you know, you could X-Rite makes densitometers, or the ones that I had. They're not horribly expensive. I don't know where they are now. Probably in the $300 range, I'm guessing. And they have both transmission and reflective densitometers. So depending on whether you're reading through film or whether you're reading something that's already printed.
They don't make anything that reads UV density anymore,
No,
unfortunately. No, they've still got repair parts for my unit, but they don't make a new one.
you know, I don't know the last time I bumped into someone who actually owned a densitometer. Well, I know you do. I did too, but you know, big deal.
I don't count.
Difference is
I hear
neither
what you're saying.
neither you nor I print. So having him is very nice, but you know, I don't remember a shop that I've gone into, a textile shop, that has a densitometer at this point.
Well, for instance, every time that I go calibrate a direct to screen, but I'm talking about the Exiles and Douthits, it's still very valuable to be able to measure the finished printed image. So that's
Oh,
where I use
absolutely.
the densitometer that I just pulled up. It's like a stapler. I'm going to dig it out quick. And you print your halftone dot pattern.
Yep.
So,
Lay it down on the bottom, push down, and it tells you what you have.
and it
Wow.
reads your
That's cool.
it reads your printed ink. And then you go into the RIP software as part of the CTS and recalibrate.
Until you hit a 5% dot, that's actually 5% on
5
what you've
equals a
printed,
5.
not what you've held on screen, what your actual print is.
Ah,
The end result. It doesn't really matter what the screen's saying. It's your ink, your squeegee, the squeegee speed, the temperature in the
Mhm.
shop at that time, water-based
right.
ink.
It's
How
a
you
bunch of
dried it.
variables.
And that also goes all the way back. I know we're talking about the output side of things a lot here, but it goes back all the way to your monitor and your Photoshop settings and the linearization. You know, if I'm looking at a 5% dot on the screen in Photoshop, which would be obviously a continuous tone grayscale, and I can't tell the difference between it and white because my monitor is not calibrated correctly, then that right there is a problem as well, because then that output, you know, transfers through the entire process. You know, I've seen people have by accident, they've gone and made an adjustment on a separation, and that particular plate has got 1 or 2% dots everywhere throughout the entire plate, and therefore it transfers to the screen, and people are like, well, like, I don't know where all this haze is coming from, but so it's important to take that process all the way through back to the art department. And so
Yeah, it's definitely fun watching, your creations come to life on the on press and through the whole works. We used to really have issues because it was two different departments, that kind of butting heads until I actually went out there and started learning how the press works and watching the artwork and seeing where stuff, what I think that we would get away with stuff, and I got to realize, hey, we're on a shirt, it's not a piece of paper. You got to open stuff up a little bit, let it breathe, and everything starts to work a lot easier like that, opening it up a little bit.
I think the biggest thing that companies don't do, they don't take their artists and make them walk around the press as a job is printing and watching each color
Yeah.
go down.
And you learn a lot.
And you, not only that, you
key.
have to make some mental notes as to what's going on and how do I avoid certain situations and how do I make it production friendly? How can I make this job not have to stop
That's the
to
biggest part.
wipe screens or to add a flash, or eliminate a flash, which would certainly be a positive thing. Sitting behind a monitor and looking at your screen,
You don't
sorry,
see that.
yeah, the greatest things have been on screen, but they haven't made it to a t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And until you know how the print process functions, one of the things I push artists into doing is learning something about screen mesh. Basically, artist does his job and then it goes to the screen department and they make the decisions as to what mesh should go on. But they don't know enough about the job, really. They just know what was handed them.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where the best production managers that I know were artists because they understood artwork, got into screen making and then production. And so they were able to tie it all together. Getting an artist to understand more about screen making, which to me, screen making is still the most critical part of the whole thing. You can have great art, great production people, you got lousy screens or lousy decisions in the screen department and you're toast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I focus heavily on that. I'm not sure where Richard is, but I don't believe he's going to be too far removed from that.
No,
To me, the screen is what dictates the quality of a job.
Yeah, that's the blueprint.
A good production person knows how to take a job that isn't so good and make it better, but you're not going to make it great. Screens are definitely going to be a major factor in there. But certainly getting an artist to understand the difference between going on a 230 or a 305, what will it do in terms of the hand? What will it do in terms of detail? What will it do in terms of productivity? Will it be vibrant enough or not?
Mhm. What we're talking about here, I think, is understanding the limitations
Yeah.
of what you can do, because a printer can only take so art, like Charlie said, and turn it into, they can improve it, but they can't make it great. So, and it follows all the way through the whole, once you've got a decent, pretty, a good separation, if it's not transferring through to the screen department and then onto the press and to the final printed fabric, then you're losing that along the way. So you're only as strong as your weakest link, I guess.
You know what I find interesting? Back when and we're going back a long ways, back when I owned my company, which we're talking about 1970s, everything we did, we designed on black. Okay. And the reason we did is if it's going to look good on black, it's going to look good on everything else.
Yeah.
The problem today is everybody's designing on white. And so why not flip your monitor so that you have a black background that you're working on?
That's what I tend to do when I design stuff. I make sure it's on black first. Once it's on black, then it'll look great on everything.
to me, it's such an easy situation. Back when I was working with Shawn back in the early 90s, I made them illustrate on black illustration board before we ever got to a computer. Didn't last very long because we didn't have to. But even in my shop, everything we did was on black illustration board using a product called Crayons, which is an oil-based pastel. And we would use the same number of colors as we were going to print. So if we wanted a 6-color job, we had our 6 specific colors, which looked very much like a plastisol. And then we did our separations by hand over the top of that, and then shot it into halftones, et cetera. I mean, my camera was probably bigger than half the print shops that I go to. But in any event, when you work on a black background, the only thing that you're missing when you go to a colored shirt is just adding the black into it. And to me, that makes it such an easy situation to develop. If it looks good on black, then it's going to look good on everything.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to probably close this down because anybody have any questions or anything? I did put my email address up there. If you want a step wedge, I'd be happy to send you what I have. Not a problem. As far as my book, one of these days I'm going to actually finish it. I keep saying that, but I haven't been motivated the last couple of weeks. Been traveling, which has been good. Working on 2 books, actually. One of them is a technical one, which is what you'd probably be interested in. My other one is my 45 years in the industry, which goes back to the day I got into this industry, which is still a questionable day. But in any event, it's been kind of fun digging out some of the old stuff. I've got piles and piles of photos that I found that I need to try and get in there. But in any event, it was wonderful having you guys. I'm going to have this on my website in a couple of days. I know Prem is on here. Prem handles my website, so I will be sending the video of this over to him later today, and should be on my website next day or 2. And so if you wanted to come back and record anything or pick up on anything, you can. Shawn also posted his email address. You want to put your website on there as well?
Email me for that. My portfolio is, I don't have it public right now, so you'll need permission to get in. So I need to make sure you get a hold of me, and I'll just send you the correct information. So,
Yeah.
and then, but I'm available, as far as, any questions when it comes to separations, I'd be glad to help out,
And you also do separations.
Yes, definitely. And do
Both
artwork. I
designing and
design as well.
separating, right?
Yes. Yep.
Terrific.
And I like to make things, turnkey solutions for the printers to where the printers have a good day, where they get excited when they go home, ready to come back tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. When things are working, you want to print, you make it go.
Yeah. And printers love that.
Yeah, awesome.
Hey, Richard, would you do me a favor? Send me your article on linearization. Thanks.
Okay,
I never bothered doing that. I'm going to steal some of it and put it in my book if that's all right with you.
I put my email address for anybody there that if
Awesome.
there's something I can help up with things that you want to read, I am the guy to ask.
Terrific.
Cool.
Awesome. I'm pretty sure I'll be emailing all 3 of you guys.
Great. Yeah, if I had that file, I would be glad to look at it. And so, that's a possibility. If you want to say, hey, take a look at this SEP and tell me what you think, I'd be glad to. So,
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. All right, then,
All right. Terrific. Well, on again in 2 weeks. I'm not sure who we're going to have on, but I do this every 2 weeks at this time. So I will post on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. And if there's any particular topic anybody wants me to address, I can certainly dig out some of the people that would be able to assist us. Otherwise, you get me for an hour of boring stuff, but who knows? We'll have to see how that works
I don't
out.
know about the boring part. It's always
Well,
interesting.
has-
That went pretty
open.
quick.
In any event, enjoyed having all of you on. Thanks again for being on, and hope to see you in a couple of weeks. Shawn, thank you very much. I do appreciate you making it. Richard, always good to see you.
Enjoyed
And,
it. And I'll see you again.
terrific. You guys have a good one now.
You too. That's right with you guys.
Take care. Stay safe.